Good morning. I'm Reverend Michael Mugford, and I'm part of the ministry team at Cole Harbour Woodside United Church, along with the Reverend Krista Elizabeth Wynne, and I'm pleased to be able to offer a spiritual reflection for us today on Maundy, Thursday. I want to begin with a reading from the Gospel of John. The evening meal was in progress, and Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, that he had come from God, and that he was returning to God. And so he got up from the table, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was around his waist. And when he came to Simon Peter, he asked him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You do not realize what I am doing now, but later you will understand. A new commandment I give to you. Love one another. As I have loved you, love one another. That way all will know that you are my disciples." This isn't unusual for Jesus to command his followers. As we read in Matthew's Gospel, when encountered by a member of the religious establishment of which Jesus was a part, the leader asked him, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment of the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and all of the prophets hang on these two commandments." It's become quite popular today to greet one another with the word namaste. It has become popularized in our culture. And in essence, it means the Spirit in me greets the Spirit in you. This is something that, as Christians, we sometimes forget. That the Spirit of God, the breath of the divine, is contained within each one of us. In the holiest moments of our lives, when that Spirit within our vessel encounters itself in another vessel, when God in me greets the God in you, our souls rejoice because we are a little more whole than we are when we are apart. So we need to, in our lives, try to actively allow the divine in us to look for the divine in another. The Christ in us needs to look for the Christ in the other. If I'm looking for Christ in people, I have to ask myself, in what sort of Christ do I believe? There are many ways in which the Christ manifests itself in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was, as we all are, a complex human being. All of us are complex human beings. And it isn't always easy to put a finger on what Christ we're looking for. Are we looking for the happy Christ, the tired Christ, the anguished Christ, the betrayed Christ, the abandoned Christ, the grieving Christ, the compassionate Christ, the crucified Christ, the angry Christ, the Christ who enjoyed feasting with publicans and sinners, who contemned hypocrisy in religious life, who attended synagogue, and who rocked the boat of the establishment? If we look carefully at the Gospels, there emerges a picture of a very complex person whom we sometimes try to compress into a nice, neat little box. The very least we can say of Jesus is that he was a prophetic mystic, who, as a prophet, saw all of the destructive faults and failings of humanity, but also, being a mystic, saw God in all people and places. At the very most, to borrow a phrase from former moderator, the Right Reverend Bill Phipps, he was as much of God as could possibly be contained in a human life, which allowed the Spirit of God in him to touch the Spirit of God in the people he encountered. In this way, the divinity in him and the divinity in God that division was so blurred that the two became indistinguishable. Jesus was in God, and God was in Jesus. So if we are looking for Jesus as the Christ in people, we have to abandon all of our preconceived ideas, all our judgments, and we have to look for that particular form of God in another person. Despite their unattractive or even obnoxious behaviors, we need to remind ourselves that Jesus came not to condemn, but to put people in touch with their true life. Having done this, like Jesus, we will be able to move with greater ease into the world around us and see God in so many places. We will be able to open the space of our own spirit, our own space of connection. In that space, when we are truly at one with ourselves, we can be at one with God. In that space where there is no judgment, no condemnation, no exclusion, there is only God. In that space, there is only love. And when we read John's Gospel again, it is God's love, manifest in the form of Jesus' servanthood, that is expressed when we hear the words. The evening meal was in progress, and Jesus, knowing that the Father had put all things under his power, that he had come from God and that he was returning to God, he got up from the table, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to take the place of a servant, and washed the feet of his disciples, drying them with the towel wrapped around him. When he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not know what I am doing now, but later you will understand. A new commandment I give to you: love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Peace this day, my brothers and sisters in Christ. Amen.